One significant cultural advancement was the emergence of kabuki theater, a dramatic art form that blended intricate costumes, lively performances, and stylized movements to narrate tales of love, betrayal, and revenge. Kabuki quickly gained immense popularity among the general populace, influencing various aspects of Japanese society. Simultaneously, the ukiyo-e woodblock print style, which translates to pictures of the floating world, began to flourish, showcasing depictions of daily life, stunning landscapes, and renowned kabuki actors. These prints were produced in large quantities, making them accessible to a broader audience and establishing a vibrant market for popular art. Artists such as Katsushika Hokusai, whose renowned print The Great Wave off Kanagawa has achieved iconic status, succeeded in connecting with both common people and elite patrons. Alongside visual arts, literature thrived during the Edo period. The esteemed haiku poet Matsuo Basho mastered the art of conveying transient moments of beauty in just a few syllables, while works like The Life of an Amorous Man by Ihara Saikaku delved into the indulgent lifestyles of Japan's merchant class. By the early 19th century, vulnerabilities were starting to surface in the Tokugawa Shogunate's illusion of stability. The stringent class system, although effective in ensuring order, hindered social mobility and economic development. The samurai class in particular was encountering financial difficulties. Many samurai whose stipends relied on the rice tax found themselves struggling as Japan's economic landscape transitioned from agriculture to commerce. Conversely, the merchant class was becoming wealthier and more powerful, challenging the traditional social hierarchy. Concurrently, the shogunate's isolationist stance faced mounting pressure. The arrival of American Commodore Matthew Perry in Edo Bay with his fleet of black ships in 1853 demanded that Japan open its ports to foreign trade. This sudden encounter shocked the Japanese, prompting them to recognize their technological lag behind the West. Perry's visit, followed by the signing of unequal treaties with the United States and other Western nations, signaled the beginning of the decline of the Tokugawa Shogunate. In the mid-19th century, the Tokugawa Shogunate's isolationist policies faced increasing challenges as Western countries aimed to access new markets in Asia. The entry of Commodore Matthew Perry and his black ships in 1853 marked the onset of the end for Japan's closed-door policy. Perry's insistence that Japan open its ports to American trade left the Tokugawa government with limited options. In 1854, Japan entered into the Treaty of Kanagawa, bringing an end to over 200 years of isolation. However, the subsequent treaties were heavily one-sided, granting Western powers privileges in Japan without requiring any corresponding benefits. These unequal treaties infuriated many Japanese, particularly those who viewed the shogunate as weakened for yielding to foreign demands. Discontent surged throughout the nation, especially among certain samurai factions and local daimyo who believed the shogunate had failed to guard Japan's independence. In the 1860s, Japan was experiencing significant upheaval. Samurai from the Satsuma and Choshu domains, along with various other discontented groups, united around the emperor, demanding the reinstatement of imperial authority and the removal of foreign influence. These groups were opposed to the Tokugawa Shogunate and the agreements made with Western nations, believing that restoring the emperor was essential for Japan to regain its power. In 1867, the young emperor Meiji took the throne. The following year, in 1868, the pro-imperial factions successfully dismantled the Tokugawa Shogunate in an event known as the Meiji Restoration. This event signaled the conclusion of 265 years of Tokugawa governance and the commencement of a new chapter in Japanese history, one characterized by modernization, reform, and eventually imperial expansion. The Meiji Restoration represented more than merely a shift of political authority back to the emperor. It entailed a fundamental restructuring of Japanese society, governance, and the economy, with the aim of modernizing the nation in light of the perceived dangers posed by Western imperialist forces. In the initial years of the Meiji era, the emperor and his advisors worked to dismantle the long-standing feudal system and replace it with a centralized contemporary state. The feudal domains controlled by the daimyo were dissolved, and Japan was reorganized into prefectures that were directly administered by the central government. This new arrangement enabled the concentration of power within the emperor's and bureaucrats' hands, effectively undermining the centuries-old authority of the samurai and daimyo. One of the most crucial reforms of the Meiji period was the abolition of the samurai class. For hundreds of years, the samurai had been Japan's principal military and political force, but in a swiftly modernizing world, their function as fighters became redundant. In 1871, the government formally revoked the hereditary privileges of the samurai, and in 1876, it prohibited the public carrying of swords, a profoundly symbolic move that signaled the conclusion of the samurai era. Although these reforms faced opposition, most notably during the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, when disgruntled samurai revolted against the new government, the transformation of Japan remained inevitable. The Meiji leaders, often called the Genro or elder statesmen, were resolute in their mission to modernize Japan's institutions in all conceivable ways to evade the fate suffered by China and other nations that had fallen victim to Western colonization. One of the mottos during the Meiji period was Fukoku Kyohei, rich country, strong army. The leaders of the Meiji government recognized that safeguarding Japan's sovereignty required both a modern military and a robust economy to support it. Consequently, they initiated extensive reforms that impacted nearly every facet of Japanese society. In the education sector, the government established a nationwide school system modeled after Western examples, aiming to cultivate a literate and disciplined citizenry. Western science, technology, and philosophical ideas were brought in, and countless Japanese students were sent overseas to study in Europe and the United States. Simultaneously, foreign specialists, known as Oyatoi Gaikokujin, were invited to assist in developing the nation's infrastructure and modernizing its industries. In 1873, the government implemented mandatory military conscription, which mandated all male citizens to join the military. This not only facilitated the creation of a contemporary Western-style army, but also diminished class distinctions by requiring men from all social strata to serve together. The government also upgraded the Navy, procuring modern warships from Britain and establishing shipyards to manufacture their own vessels. Economically, the Meiji administration encouraged industrial growth through a mix of state-led initiatives and private enterprise. The government created state-owned factories and mines, which were subsequently sold to private entrepreneurs who became the architects of Japan's influential zaibatsu, or financial conglomerates. These zaibatsu, such as Mitsubishi, Mitsui, and Sumitomo, would later come to dominate Japan's economy in the ensuing years. Besides industry, Japan also revamped its financial system, forming a central bank and adopting a modern currency structure. The government enacted land reforms that privatized agricultural land, boosting productivity and fostering a class of affluent landowners who would propel Japan's economic progress. Although the Meiji Constitution seemed to introduce elements of democracy into Japanese politics, actual authority continued to rest with the emperor and his advisors. The Genro, the senior statesmen who had been instrumental in the Meiji Restoration, remained influential behind the scenes. The constitution granted the emperor substantial executive powers, including control over the military and the authority to dissolve the diet. Nevertheless, The Meiji Constitution marked a significant advance toward modern governance and served to legitimize the Meiji government in the eyes of both the Japanese populace and foreign nations. The establishment of a contemporary legal framework inspired by Western systems further reinforced Japan's status as a modern nation-state. As Japan progressed internally, it also began to assert itself globally, especially in East Asia. The Meiji administration understood that to maintain Japan's independence, it had to position itself as a regional power capable of rivaling the Western imperialists partitioning China. Japan's first significant challenge arose with the First Sino-Japanese War, 1894 to 1895, fought over dominance in Korea. For centuries, Korea had been a subordinate state to China, but Japan aimed to break free from Chinese influence and draw Korea into its own sphere of control. The war concluded with a decisive victory for Japan, resulting in its acquisition of Taiwan and the Pescadores Islands, along with substantial influence over Korea. Japan's triumph over China surprised the Western powers, who had traditionally perceived Japan as a primitive, feudal society. The Treaty of Shimonoseki, which concluded the conflict, compelled China to relinquish territory and pay a significant indemnity to Japan, indicating the rise of Japan as a new imperial force in East Asia. Nonetheless, Japan's aspirations quickly led to tensions with Russia, another significant player in the area. In 1904, disputes regarding dominance over Korea and Manchuria escalated into the Russo-Japanese War. A conflict that would have significant implications for both Japan and the global landscape. Defying expectations, Japan achieved a series of remarkable victories against the Russian army and navy, culminating in the annihilation of the Russian Baltic Fleet at the Battle of Tsushima. The war concluded with the Treaty of Portsmouth in 1905, facilitated by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. Japan emerged as the preeminent power in East Asia, securing control of Korea and establishing a sphere of influence in southern Manchuria. The victory over Russia, a prominent European power, was regarded as a pivotal moment in world history. It marked the first instance of an Asian country defeating a Western nation in modern times and signaled the beginning of Japan's ascent as a global power. Following its win against Russia, Japan continued to extend its empire. In 1910, Japan officially annexed Korea, which had essentially been a protectorate since the conclusion of the Russo-Japanese War. The annexation of Korea signified the onset of a new chapter in Japan's imperial expansion, ultimately leading to clashes with Western powers in the 20th century. It also represented the rising strength and self-assurance of a nation that had rapidly evolved from a feudal society into a modern imperial power in a matter of decades. In 1912, Emperor Meiji passed away and his successor, Emperor Taisho, took the throne. The Taisho period was characterized by a brief experiment in democracy and liberal thought, contrasting sharply with the authoritarian rule of the preceding Meiji era. During this time, Japan witnessed a surge of political reform and social transformation, known as Taisho democracy. Political parties gained influence, and there was a growing focus on civil liberties and citizen engagement. The Japanese public became more politically involved, leading to the emergence of various political movements and labor unions. Intellectuals and activists campaigned for increased freedoms and social reforms, advocating for issues such as women's voting rights and labor rights. Nevertheless, this liberal era was short-lived and encountered significant resistance from conservative elements within the military and government. As World War I commenced in 1914, Japan capitalized on the situation to enhance its influence in Asia. By aligning with the Allies, Japan aimed to establish its superiority in the Pacific and Asia. During the war's turmoil, Japanese troops occupied German-controlled territories in China and the Pacific, including the Shandong Peninsula and several islands. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 officially recognized Japan's territorial expansions, but it also strained relations with Western powers, who grew apprehensive about Japan's expanding aspirations. As economic conditions deteriorated, militaristic and nationalistic ideas gained popularity. The military began to play a more dominant role in Japanese politics, with military leaders promoting expansionism as a remedy for Japan's internal issues. Nationalist factions arose, championing the concept of a Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, which envisioned Japanese supremacy in Asia and the expulsion of Western nations. In this climate, the military started to position itself as the nation's protector. This increasing influence culminated in various events, including the assassination of political figures and the military's intervention in domestic matters. By the late 1920s, the military had significantly regained control over the government, eroding the democratic progress achieved during the Taisho era. A critical moment in Japan's shift towards militarism occurred in 1931 with the Manchurian Incident. The Japanese army orchestrated an explosion on the South Manchurian Railway to justify invading Manchuria, a resource-rich area in northeastern China. Despite lacking authorization from the Japanese government, the military swiftly occupied Manchuria and established a puppet regime named Manchukuo. This invasion provoked international outcry, particularly from the League of Nations, which demanded Japan's withdrawal. However, influenced heavily by the military, the Japanese government refused to relent. In 1933, Japan exited the League of Nations, signaling its increasing detachment from the global community. The occupation of Manchuria marked a crucial turning point for Japan, reinforcing its militaristic approach and expansionist goals. The military advocated for further incursions into China, escalating tensions with the Chinese government. The Chinese Nationalist Party and the Communist Party, despite their differences, united in their resistance to Japanese aggression. The conflicts in China escalated into full-blown warfare in 1937 with the onset of the Second Sino-Japanese War. Japanese military forces initiated a violent invasion of China, seizing significant urban centers such as Beijing and Shanghai. This war was marked by extreme brutality and war crimes committed by Japanese soldiers, particularly during the Nanjing Massacre, where hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians lost their lives, and widespread sexual violence was inflicted upon women. The situation quickly intensified, evolving into one of the largest fronts of World War II. Japan aimed to establish a puppet regime in China. However, the Chinese resistance proved to be unwavering. Both the Chinese nationalists and communists continued to resist the Japanese occupation, receiving different levels of assistance from Western nations, especially the United States. As the conflict persisted, Japan encountered growing global disapproval for its actions in China. The United States, which had earlier adopted a neutral stance, started to enforce economic penalties against Japan, cutting off essential supplies of oil and other resources. This further burdened Japan's economy and heightened military leaders' conviction that a conflict with the United States was unavoidable. On December 7, 1941, Japan executed a surprise assault on the United States naval installation at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The objective of the attack was to incapacitate the U.S. Pacific Fleet, allowing Japan to consolidate its territorial advancements in Asia and the Pacific without interference from the United States. While the assault was a tactical victory for Japan, it united American determination and prompted the U.S. to enter World War II. In the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, Japan swiftly expanded its empire in Southeast Asia, seizing control of British Malaya, Singapore, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies. The initial triumphs of the Japanese military established an empire that extended from Pacific Islands to the shores of China. However, as the conflict continued, Japan's overreach started to affect its efforts. In 1942, conditions began to shift against Japan. The United States secured significant victories at the Battle of Midway, delivering a debilitating blow to the Japanese fleet. This incident marked the start of a series of Allied offensives that would ultimately result in the liberation of occupied territories and the gradual weakening of Japanese military strength. As the war dragged on, Japan confronted increasing difficulties on multiple fronts. Allied forces, strengthened by the industrial power of the United States, initiated a series of campaigns in the Pacific, progressively reclaiming territory and advancing toward Japan itself. The harsh island-hopping strategy resulted in intense combat on locations such as Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Iwo Jima, where Japanese defenders fought tenaciously to the last individual. By 1945, Japan found itself on the defensive, with its cities subjected to continuous bombardment from Allied forces. The strategic bombing campaign, especially the firebombing of Tokyo and other urban areas, caused catastrophic destruction and civilian casualties. The Japanese economy and infrastructure lay in ruins, with the population enduring severe shortages of food and essential supplies. In August 1945, the United States made the contentious choice to deploy atomic bombs against Japan to hasten the conclusion of the conflict. On August 6th, an atomic bomb was detonated over Hiroshima, followed by a second bomb on Nagasaki 3 days later. These bombings led to unprecedented devastation and loss of life, resulting in hundreds of thousands killed, injured, or left to cope with the long-term effects of radiation. Confronted with immense destruction and the danger of further devastation, Japan declared its unconditional surrender on August 15, 1945. The formal surrender was finalized aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, officially marking the end of World War II. The repercussions of the war would influence Japan for decades, leaving lasting scars on the nation and its populace. If you love seeing history come alive in stunning 3D, make sure to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell us in the comments which era you want to see next.